Tri-State Freethinkers interviews from February 20th, 2016, Polyamory with guest Leslie Knickers.
I'm Jim Helton, president of Tri-State Freethinkers. I'm sitting here with Ginger Knickers. Every year we talk about, in the month of February, we talk about sex. Ginger has been our poly speaker 2 years in a row. This is our second discussion, our follow-up after a meeting, where we get a more in-depth look on polyamory. So Ginger, let me ask you a few questions to start off. What's the biggest misconception about polyamory?
Probably that it is swinging, or that it is a license to just have sex with as many people as you want to, that it's cheating.
Okay.
Those are the big ones.
So define what you would consider swinging versus polyamory. What's that difference?
The biggest difference between swinging and polyamory is based more on building relationships, actual dating or long-term relationships, where swinging generally happens only at swing clubs or at swing parties that are sometimes held at hotels. But swinging, generally, you might have sex with somebody at a club or a party, but you have no relationship with them outside of your sexual encounter.
I'd imagine, is there some crossover between swinging and polyamory?
Huge crossover, and a lot of times people will start out swinging and then maybe meet someone that they do like at a club, and so they decide they want to have a relationship and become polyamorous, and sometimes people go back and forth. If you broadly define it, swinging is a type of multiple love, but it's not polyamory.
So polyamory is more about the relationship, where swinging is about the sex, if we were to simplify it.
Yeah.
Okay, makes sense. What are some of the keys to making polyamory work?
Communication, ad nauseum communication. You have to talk about everything, things you didn't think you would ever have to talk about. You have to talk about feelings, you have to talk about insecurities and fears, and hey, I like this person that my significant other is dating, but I don't like something about them. Well, I have to talk about that. I have to discover, why don't I like that? Is that my own insecurity, or is it something that's actually wrong?
How do you deal with insecurities, like your own and your partner's insecurities?
You have to find the root cause of it. So if I'm insecure because I feel like I'm being neglected, or I feel like I'm going to be replaced, that would be something you have to address with your partner. Like, oh, okay, I'm sorry, but I feel like this new partner is replacing me, and you have to talk through it. But the other thing is then to practice being secure, which is sometimes mind games with yourself.
How do you do that?
I think you have to understand that people aren't replaceable, and if you are polyamorous, then you know that means that you're open to the fact that someone else coming in could add to your relationship, and they're not trying to replace you. So sometimes you just have to remind yourself that I'm not replaceable, we are okay, different isn't always bad, and it takes practice.
And I guess that would lead into also jealousy, as I see being a big issue in polyamory.
Huge issue, yep. And that, again, is you have to find the cause in yourself. Generally, it's a reaction. Jealousy isn't like the emotion, it's the reaction to something. So whether it's fear that you're going to be replaced, or someone's going to leave you, you have to find what's causing the jealousy. But that is hard, and it seems like with every new relationship there's a different kind of jealousy, and so you're always finding new emotions or new parts of you that you didn't know could be triggered, and you just have to figure out why is this bugging me.
The one thing I notice when I'm talking to people about polyamory, because it's not simple, there's so many different facets. What are some of the different styles and types of polyamorous relationships?
Yeah, we could be here all day. Generally speaking, probably the most often practiced is like a triad or a V, which would be 3 people in the triad, like a triangle. Everyone is intimate somehow. That doesn't always mean sex. It might mean just emotional intimacy. That's very common, as is the V, where you would have a hinge, and whoever's the hinge, male, female, the partners, the points of the V, don't interact as much. Everything goes through that V. That's the most common. But then you can spread out that V and make zigzag lines forever. And, there could be lots of different people dating different people, and those are called a polycule. That's a relatively new word. Poly and like a molecule, so if you can picture any molecule, that's what it looks like. And then there are families, poly families, that live together, and there's polyfidelity, which means everyone in a certain group practices fidelity within the group, and they don't go outside of the group without approval of all the members. There's just completely open polyamory, or like relationship anarchy, where there pretty much are no rules, and I think that gets a bit tricky.
What are some of the benefits of being a polyamorous relationship versus a monogamous relationship?
I think a wider network, like more chances to, bond with people, have close relationships, and sometimes, you have a partner and you don't meet all their needs, and they don't meet all yours, and sometimes bringing another person or another couple people in helps keep everyone happier and more secure. It can help with, if you have a supportive and stable group, it can help with child rearing and things like that.
So I understand polyamory may not be for everybody, but what bothers me when I have conversations is the people that don't understand. Maybe it may not be for them, but they don't understand how other people can do this. Mm-hmm. What would you say to those people to try to help them maybe understand?
Well, I just recently listened to the book Sex at Dawn, and it seems like there's quite a bit of evidence that, like other primates, we weren't monogamous until farming really became a thing. And so way back when, bigger groups where people were together, but when you started passing out land, and then you had to keep the land in the family, it looks like that's when monogamy became a thing, because this little section had to be ours and in our family. But we're just not that far removed from other primates who still practice sharing everything.
There's very few species on this planet that are actually monogamous.
Yeah.
I would agree with you. And Daryl Ray, by the way, has some great information on that subject. What has poly done for your personal relationship? Good, the bad?
Good and bad. I think that it has strengthened our marriage overall, but to get there, we had several times that it absolutely brought us to our knees. So, and that was dealing with our own stuff, my own stuff, his own stuff, but then also, unfortunately, people that come in are not always well-meaning, and you don't necessarily have as much time to get to know people as you do when you are monogamous. I think poly relationships tend to move much faster than monogamous relationships, and sometimes you can miss like big warning signals, and generally that it can hurt the marriage, but one person normally sees it before the other person, and then that can be very hard to bring up. Like, something's wrong, and no, nothing's wrong, we're having fun. What's wrong? So.
And I've talked to a number of polyamorous people, couples, and they all are very honest, and they talk about, there is this stress element that's there, especially in the beginning of working through these things, but there's also all these benefits. The one question I ask is, that they seem, is it worth it?
I think if the relationships, the new one, it's working, then yes, it's worth it. But if there are big red flags, if someone is not being honest, or if it's placing undue stress outside of the normal, let me work through this type of thing, then no. Because I don't think it's fair to, especially since we have children, to put undue stress on a marriage and the kids who have absolutely no say in this.
Do you recommend telling your kids? Do you have that as a part of that, or do you keep that totally separate?
Our kids are still very young, and we've not told them. Now, we've had people over, partners over and things, but thankfully they still go to bed really early, so they never saw any kind of contact, but again, they're young. So
as they get older, say teenagers, is that something you plan to share, or eventually, or no?
Kids aren't dumb, so I think you'd have to bring it up eventually.
They'll figure it out before you tell them.
Yeah, so I would err on the telling them when they are able to comprehend it. A caveat being, there are custody issues sometimes, and you would not want an ex or somebody else to use it as leverage, and I think that can be worrisome.
What would you recommend for a new couple looking to explore polyamory, or they're watching this, they go, we've been talking about it, we've been thinking about it. What would be some advice? I always said wisdom is learning from one's mistakes. Greater wisdom is learning from others' mistakes.
Yeah.
So what advice could you give to a new couple looking at polyamory?
I would do so much reading and so much research. Cunning Minx has a good podcast called Polyamory Weekly. That's a great starting place. There are several books, More Than Two by Franklin Vo. Opening Up is a good one. The Ethical Slut. So you need to read all those. Read them cover to cover. I have had people that say, oh, I read the couple chapters. We're good. No, actually read about it. And then find a local group and go and talk to people, but wait. I mean, just talk to people, meet people. Generally, there are plenty of singles and couples in the groups that will tell you good and bad. So I think you really have to be willing to wait and listen and see if, when all the flashy fun stuff is stripped away, if you're really willing to do it.
Now, we've talked about couples already, married couples, but what about single people? I've seen this come up a lot. Like, they're on dating sites, they're dating, some of them are even monogamous, but they're dating multiple people trying to find, that partner. Mm-hmm. So they don't really even consider themselves polyamorous. But at what point for even somebody polyamorous when they're dating, I guess that come up that they're looking or poly? At what point do you discuss that in a relationship? I mean, is that a first date item or a pre-date item, or is that a third date rule? I mean, at what point?
There's differing opinions on that. My opinion is that I've only had this experience. I'm a married person, so if I'm going to date someone, I was on OkCupid for a while. That was a pre-date thing, because I just didn't think it was fair if I presented myself as a single person looking to date. Maybe I like this person, maybe they really like me, and then I'm going to drop a bombshell on them 3 days in that, oh, I'm polyamorous and I'm married.
And I agree with you on that being married, but what if you're, say, single? Like, if you were a single female or a single male and you're just going on that date because you are single, you may not even be seeing anybody at the time, anyone else at that time. Do you still recommend that being a pre-date thing, or?
I don't know. I think that if you are truly a polyamorous person and that's the way you've lived your life for a long time, I think, you probably should disclose it, unless you're really willing to, especially like on dating sites like OkCupid, there's 1,000 settings, so you really could set it up so that it says you're not monogamous or you're not looking for monogamy. So maybe if you have it set that way, someone still contacts you, you've got some wiggle room, but most people on dating sites aren't polyamorous. So it's still an obscure slice of life. So I think that I still think it would be an awfully big bomb to drop on someone.
And I think if people are poly and they meet, then it's fairly easy to have that relationship and those discussions. I think where it gets difficult is somebody may read about polyamory, see this, or they've been wanting it, they didn't know a name for it, and they're like, oh, this is what I wanted. But they already have a partner who may not be thinking the same thing, or may not even they haven't even had the discussion.
Mm-hmm.
And I can imagine that that'd be very complicated. Do you have any advice for those people?
Well, I was laughing at the pre-questions that we had because how we found out about the whole polyamorous thing was watching Sister Wives. Years ago, when it came on the first, I'm like, hey, that's really cool. So, of course, we're not Mormon. We didn't want anything like that. But just started doing some research. And we're like, oh, there's like a whole name for that. And this is what it is. So, I think you would have to find a way to ease into it. Or not. If you have a really open kind of communication policy, you could just say, hey, I've been thinking about this. See what happens.
And just start the conversation, again,
Yeah.
communication.
Because what is the other option is that you do it on the side. Well, that's cheating, and that's not poly. So yeah, I mean, it's a little bit wonky, but if you really want to do it, someone's going to have a conversation.
And I think that's another misconception I've seen is when people say, oh, okay, we're going to be polyamorous. Well, I'm not okay with you sleeping around. I'm not okay with giving you the license to go out. But that's not what polyamory is, correct? I mean, when you're giving somebody permission to date someone or some person, that's not a date. That's not permission to date anybody and have sex all the time.
No, it should not be. And that's the thing about polyamory is all about being open and not hiding things. So if you're not telling someone, well, then that's not any different than just cheating. So polyamory, generally everyone knows what's going on, and that's the whole tenet of it.
What about rules? What's your thoughts on rules?
I think that at least a basic couple of rules aren't a bad thing. I don't know. I know when we started, we probably had a page of rules, like just things that most of them were born out of fear or jealousy or anything else, and we'd add to it. And very quickly, we pared it down to 3 rules, I think. It was safe sex, be considerate, and of time, and be honest. Considerate of time means considerate of the family's time, and then, you get to be considerate of your own time, too. If this is something you want to do or something I want to do, you have to give some freedom, but be respectful about it. Rules are okay. The other thing that comes up with rules a lot of time is a veto, if you've heard that.
Yes.
So let's say I go out on a date with somebody and my husband goes, nope, don't like him, gone. I don't think that's a good thing, except in cases of, I saw them last week at the ER for a heroin overdose or something like that. There would be valid cases to veto someone. But if you always have the threat that your partner could say, get rid of this person you're dating, then you're never going to relax into it.
And I think a veto at a beginning of a relationship is different than one later. Like if
Yes.
you go on a first date and you're going to say, I'm going to put a veto, there's not that emotional connection on a first date. But if it's 6 months into the relationship, there's more people involved, then
Yeah.
that could be a problem.
Yeah, again,
So then-
that would be a jealousy-based thing, unless it's like, oh, I just saw them on the news.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I can see that. All right, so we talked about, like, you say you're going to have this conversation with your partner about polyamory. You're interested, you're all excited, and you're honest, which is great. You communicate, but your partner also communicates back to you. But it's not what you want. That they're not interested in multiple relationships. Then what are your options?
I think that your options are that it probably comes down a bit to integrity and being true to yourself, but also your relationship. So if this is a marriage that you've had for 5 years or 10 years and you have kids or you don't have kids or whatever, are you willing to potentially hurt your spouse and children and pursue it? Are you going to do it anyway and then go to therapy or whatever? Or sometimes you just have to suck it up and not do it, I think, is part of that. Because the polyamory is not something you can talk someone into. And generally, there is polymono relationships where one partner is polyamorous and the other person is monogamous. But generally, the monogamous person is not against polyamory. They just don't want any part of it for themselves, but they're okay if their partner goes out. But if that's not the situation that you're in, I don't think it's okay.
That makes sense. Ginger, we really appreciate your time. Come check out the Tri-State Freethinkers and also Cincinnati Poly.
Yes, I understand that my whole life is just a blink of an eye. The history of the earth is with each moment that goes by. But this moment that I'm with you, it feels like time has stood still. It feels somehow like it matters, and that it always will. Thank you so much.